Good morning from northern Colorado. We're talking fish farming again today. We've had some fits and starts with a number of our fish farming episodes, but I think we've got this one wired because we're actually recording it with a program called Minicams also in the background. So if the blab doesn't record, which we've had some challenges with, then we'll be fine. So we're going to talk about fish farming. I think this will be our 7th or 8th episode. But first, I wanted to talk about some other things coming up. Tonight, we're going to have a very cool Alpaca Summit interview with Bill and Jennifer talking about their event that's coming up this summer and their alpaca breeding and just all kinds of things that they do in the alpaca industry. They are prominent breeders and ones that we have really high respect for. Lots of people enjoy listening to them. So that's going to be this evening, US time, obviously. And if you're listening to this as a recording, you'll find that live cast also here on the Blab channel, but you can also find it online at what I'll put in the chat right now, which is our Alpaca Summit. Site. And my system just did what it just seems to do all the time, which is it switched to where after I start to type something in the chat, it just goes away. And all of a sudden, I don't see anything. So I'm assuming that you're seeing me, but I don't know for sure. So today, again, we're going to talk about some other aspects of home fish farming. And again, something you can do profitably. And I wanted to talk about just some broader pictures today. So I'm going to ask some questions. One, do you have sufficient financial resources? So what does that mean? Well, that's why you've got to do some planning. We've talked about planning before, but before you get started, at whatever level, even if it's going to cost $100 or $1,000 or $10,000, make sure you have those resources available. Water source. We haven't talked a lot about water sources yet. Let's talk about that a little bit now. You really do need a good water source. And depending on if you have a flow-through system in a pond or in a tank, or if it's a recirculating system, you're going to have a great water source. Here's what you can't have. You can't have city water coming out of a well that's high in things like fluorides or other types of chemicals, that would be used to treat your water that would be negative for the animals, the fish that you're growing in the system. Now, if you're on a city water supply, the cool thing is that you can actually get your analysis. It's publicly available. You can go online to whatever your local jurisdiction is, city, county, water, a private water supply, and determine what your water quality is. They are required by law to analyze it. If you're on a well, you won't have that. You'll have to do that yourself. And there are a number of different laboratories that you can use to do analyses. And the kinds of things you're interested in, I mentioned a little bit, were things like fluorides, chlorides, ammonia, obviously things like bacteria, which I don't think you need to worry about. But it's mainly those, fluorides, chlorides, ammonia. And you need to have those at levels which are quite low. I'm not going to go into all the details of that. That's a more sophisticated, more advanced topic. However, if you are using water from a city supply, municipal supply, you can actually eliminate those things by letting your water sit. And I would highly recommend that you do that, even if you're using a well. And the reason for doing it with a well is a little different than what you use the reason for using water that you get from a municipal supply. When it's coming from a municipal supply, you're doing it because you want to let the water air. You want to allow any of those chemicals that are negative that are in it to go up into the air. We call that volatilizing. And you could even enhance that by putting an air stone in the water as you're holding it. And you would probably want to have something like a 55-gallon blue barrel that we've talked about before that you would use to hold that water in. Something that you would hold for some period of time, usually at least 24 hours, possibly a little bit longer. If it's well water, you're doing the holding for a different reason. You're doing the holding because that water, as it comes out of the ground, is going to have no oxygen in it, or very little, not nearly enough for any kinds of organisms to live in. And it would be a very major problem to just put that immediately into where your animals are living. You don't have to hold that necessarily for as long, but you are going to want to aerate it. You want to get oxygen into it before you actually utilize it. And we're going to do a little bit of a search here for water aeration. And we'll just show you what I'm talking about as it relates to air stones. So we're going to switch cameras here to our screen and go here. We're going to look up some images of water aeration, which we're going to see some air stones that we'll show to you. For some reason, we're being a little bit slow. So here we've got some pictures of some air stones, some aeration. This is actually water being aerated in a pond. And I'm going to switch my search term here and go to air stones. Just change that. These you can buy at pet stores, at things like PetSmart, if you were, but you could also buy them online on Amazon, eBay. Here's some examples. Here's one that I'm showing a larger example of here. This is probably about 6 inches long. Here's an example of another one. Now, we haven't talked about this, but you're going to need to supply air to these. So you're going to need a small air pump of some kind. Here's just a number of pictures of different kinds of air stones. And we're going to change this to water air pumps. Look up some pumps, some small ones. And you can get these that would be aquarium sized. Here's an example of one. This should be something that would be fairly inexpensive. Here's a source. We'll actually go to this and we'll show you. We'll probably see what the price is. Again, this is in US dollars. I'm guessing going to be in the $25 range. So this is a source that we got here. Here's some pumps. A little more expensive for these. These are for bigger ponds. This is $109. There's $129, $169. These are getting bigger as we go up here. $199. Let me see what the water volume or air volume of this first one would be. It's 20 watts, it doesn't. I'm not going to look into the specifics here, but These are probably even overkill for you. You can use smaller pumps for your system. Let me see if I can find another one here that'll be a little bit smaller for you to look at. Here's obviously a picture of a much bigger one, which you don't need to have a much larger pump. Here we go. Here's a smaller one. The budget pump at $16.99. So this is made by a company called Russell. Again, the air would go in on one side here and come out of the pump. You could put this right down in. It doesn't look like this is submersible. So actually, this is one where you would pull the air in and you'd have a tube going out of it and going into your water. And then you'd put that air stone that we showed earlier at the end of your tube. And just showing some other pictures of different kinds of air pumps. So going back to just some of the broad parameters that you need to be looking at your farm. We've talked about this before, but if you're going to use a tank system and you're in a temperate climate, you might want to be indoors. You might want to think of that being inside of a building. You can never have enough plumbing and pipes. You're going to always want to be finding that. And I would highly recommend that you think about going to auctions, that wherever you're at in the world, estate sales, auctions, garage sales, they're called by any number of different names, and look for used equipment. And you're going to be looking for things like nets and bolts. You're going to look for any kind of aerators that we just talked about, any kind of plumbing, pipes, fittings, and so on. All those sorts of things, electrical fittings, all of that. And I'm going to go back and let's talk about water testing a little bit. We've brought that up briefly in some of our other sessions. Let's talk about water testing equipment. And switch back to looking at some water testing equipment. Again, we've talked about kits a little bit. Here's an example of a kit that includes some meters and then lots of test strips and liquids that you mix together, and you look at color changes. Here's a much more sophisticated probe that you would use for oxygen analysis. There's a company called YSI that makes a lot of really great equipment in this area. But you don't have to be nearly this sophisticated. You can use kits like we've described. Here's a small one that is relatively inexpensive. There's companies that are named like named Hawk and Lamont and others that make incredible, inexpensive. Again, you can get them in the range of $25 to $30 to do testing. Temperature testing is also important, and you're going to need to have a probe probably for that. And a little search to show you temperature testing for water. These can be acquired very inexpensively at places like your large department stores. Here's an example of one, a wholesale digital water temperature gauge. This is probably at wholesale less than $10. You're going to want something, if possible, that gives you continuous reading. Here's another variety that just has a probe that you stick into the water, and it reads out temperature to you. This is showing it in centigrade. Lots of different options here. again, I would recommend going on something like Amazon or eBay, and you can find this kind of a testing probe for yourself. Here's another test kit that has a variety of different things in it. There are much more crude testers that are things like probes. So this is an example of a digital water quality tester with temperature as one of its testing parameters that it will calculate. So we've talked about a broad array of testing related things today. We've talked about how you should make sure that you know the quality of your water. If you're getting it right out of its source, right out of a well or right out of a municipal supply, you're not going to want to put it immediately into your system. Instead, you're going to want to let it sit so that either chemicals can leave it or that you can have oxygen that will get into it. If you're getting it from a pond or a lake, again, I would test it, but that's probably even a better place to get it. If you have a stream or a pond that you could collect the water in, that would be a great source. We've talked about this before, but the best systems are those that are going to get better with time. And if you keep them running, they'll more closely do what? What did we say? What's important? You think about this. Simulate where the fish or the animals would be living normally. Simulating a pond, simulating a lake, simulating a stream. And what we're doing is we're simulating that natural environment, but we're increasing the amount of organisms. And when we increase the amount of organisms, we increase the stress on the system. And with more stress, that's why we have to be really carefully monitoring a variety of different things that the fish or the animals are being impacted by. So rather short today. Just wanted to get this back out and get into our recording mode. Sure appreciate you listening. Remember, tonight we've got Bill and Jennifer Markham. They're going to talk about our alpaca, talk about their event that's coming up this summer in the Pacific Northwest. Join us with that. We'll have another one of our Ecolonomics in Action fish farming sessions tomorrow. And we sure enjoy having you with us. We hope you've enjoyed what you've heard, and have a great day.